On this channel, I often discuss the start of my emo phase when I was about 16 years old. I used to play with a bunch of crappy emo groups in Cleveland where we spent most of our rehearsal time choosing song names and talking shit on Sunny Day Real Estate rather than actually making any music. These bands lasted maybe 2 practice sessions before they broke up forever. It was good times. I would give a lot to be able to play music with people again, but looking back on that time, I realized that I missed something important to most teenage musical experiences. During my mid to late teens, I listened to emo and scrams almost exclusively rather than listening to the other teenage music obsession, an obsession often held by white straight teen males who don't know their pan yet. Metal. Of course, you can't just say that teens listen to metal. The question is, what metal are those teens listening to? Metal is up there with techno for being a genre with so many splinters that to just say you like that genre gives someone little to no real idea of what you like. So when I say that teenagers listen to metal, that can mean anything. Is it the edgelord prog metal fan who says that Dream Theater is better than pop music because of the amount of notes per minute? Is it the guy that buys the dead goat to throw on stage at the death metal concert? Or is it the one of 3 dudes at the gore grind concert who is standing completely still? It could be any of them, and all of those teens are valid, and all of those are experiences that I didn't get to have when I was a teenager. But for the sake of this video, I want to talk about black metal, a genre that I didn't really get into until I was in college, and one that I have a complicated relationship with. Black metal fascinates me more than any other metal subgenre due to its expressiveness and how varied its production can be. Some of the most lo-fi and distorted sounds I have ever heard, and some of the most ambient and relaxing sounds I've ever heard, have both been put underneath the label of black metal. But even better than that, those 2 different sounds can be put out by the same artist on the same release. Very few genres have that opportunity to change production so wildly, and that gives black metal a freedom that is all its own. And sadly, I find this to be a freedom that is rarely explored. I'm not calling anyone a ripoff of anyone else, but I do feel like artists often repeat the ideas that have already been said by other artists in the genre, and rarely venture out to find their own sound in this expansive genre. And if your musical message requires you to sound like Emperor, that's fine, and I'm sure that your music is awesome, and it would only be benefited by having that sound. But what I want from the genre is to see further expansion, to push what black metal is considered in drastic and shocking ways. I mean, you have one of the most freeing genres in music where you can just do anything that you want. No genre is as free as black metal. You can be loud, you can just straight up be dungeon synth, you can be ambient, you can do whatever you want, but you choose to sound like Behemoth and Mayhem. And if you're not bringing anything new to the table with that sound, then I just don't really get into it. That's why my favorite black metal groups are those that most elitists hate. The stuff that isn't really black metal but leans close enough to that to still be called it, while also leaning farther out into new directions. This leads me to one of my favorite black metal albums of all time, Murmure. Murmure by Murmure was built upon an hour-long guitar improv session that was then edited and added to create a full album. Before we move forward, I want to ask you a quick question. You just recorded an hour of you improving on your primary instrument, and you're feeling pretty good about it. You did some good stuff, and you want to make an album based off your playing. How are you going to add to your improv? Well, probably the first thing you're going to want to do is to look at what instrument you used and think of how it could best fit into a genre. If I was playing my sax, then I would probably take it in a more jazzier direction than if I was playing drums, or I would probably lead to something more punk or tribal sounding. Murmure's improv session was on his guitar, and the sound was distorted, lo-fi, and abrasive, leading him to go into a direction that would be classified as atmospheric black metal. Now, all of that is fairly standard stuff. Where I think Murmure really stands out is his approach to interacting with metal as a genre. When you think of black metal, what instruments do you think of? Probably guitars, bass, drums, screaming vocals, maybe some synths. That's probably your typical black metal sound, right? It's going to feature those instruments. All of those sounds are present on here, but they show up in odd ways. The most conventional sounding of these instruments are the drums. They do the common things that they do in black metal. They play blast beats and play grooves that keep time. The one uncommon thing that they do, though, is not play. As you listen to this album, you begin to realize just how much the album worships atmosphere and treats its soundscapes with the utmost love, passion, and respect. And when an instrument does not support an atmosphere, then it will not be present. This is a rule that is also kept with the vocals. Vocals stay buried in the mix, never really becoming the focus of a piece, instead being used as an additional texture to deepen the ambience. Metal screaming has always been an interesting sound for me, one that is praised, loved, and imitated, but very rarely explored deeper than just being a lead vocal. This is one of the first big diversions from the standard black metal sound. The vocals as texture rather than being the central focus of the record is small, but it just shows how much this album goes against the grain, not doing the most common things that the genre expects of you, and then pulling it off still, finding something interesting in breaking the rules. The guitar is fantastic on here as well, but it's not doing any sick solos or riffs. The guitar on this release is purely for creating atmosphere. The guitar lets us have our noisier segments. When it is present, we also hear the other elements of metal that we are used to. The metal segments on this album are not the most hardcore thing in the world, but it's atmospheric black metal. That's not really the point of it. The point of atmospheric black metal is more to sit with a sound, to explore its inner workings and see what emotions can come out of them. Murmure's metal sound is dense, with guitars laden with distortion filling up frequencies and swallowing everything else whole. Every instrument is eaten by the guitars. The drums, the vocals, the synths, they all have to work inside of that soundscape, never working with the guitars in these sections and always being dragged along by them. Sections of the hour-long improv session are looped in many of the tracks, with repetition letting these tracks build up their dark atmospheres, densely layered with distortion. These atmospheres rule, but they're not my favorite thing about the album. The other atmospheres, those that lean much closer to ambient, are my favorite parts of this album. These ambient sections are based around pads, big ambient pads that serve as a much more relaxing bed for field recordings and samples to dance on. Guitars still make an appearance, but not really coming in as repetitious figures that swallow everything. Instead, the guitar acts as another sound to interact with, not necessarily being the all-consuming frequency fog that it was in the more black metal sections, but instead playing along with the other sounds. Torchbearer is the standout track in this style. The track opens with these gorgeous Casio sounds that quickly get submerged in the atmosphere that follows. Different chords pop up at us through what I think is tape at half speed. Putting tape at lower speeds is a classic ambient trick, and one that almost every ambient fan now knows thanks to its popularity on sites like YouTube and Instagram. It creates this gorgeous warm texture that sounds slightly out of tune, but not in a way that's too gross. The out of tune sound combined with the warmth of tape always puts this nice feeling in my gut. It's the same kind of feeling that I get when I talk to someone I love. It's a beautiful feeling. We don't really stay in tape land for that long, though. Halfway through the song, the tape drops out and the synths take over. They shimmer at us, much colder than the tape that we were with before. Those synths are not alone, though, at least not for the entire song. Halfway through the synth section, we hear a sample of the song Sunset, which is a song from the Wicker Man OST. The trumpets give the synths a warmth that was missing when the tape went away. It's an incredible use of samples, not drawing attention to itself and blending so well that you could never guess that it came from another artist. All of these things combine together to create an incredibly warm and comforting ambient track. The samples are one of the best things about this album. As I mentioned before, we hear all of the normal instruments one would expect from a black metal record, but we also hear some instruments that are not common to metal, which come as quite a surprise. I think that's why it was so shocking to me when I first heard the first track of this album, Murmure. The track eagerly greets us with flutes. Now, woodwinds are not a foreign entity to black metal. for a genre that's so inspired by paganism, one should expect a flute or two to be in there every now and then. But what I find so interesting about Murmure is that the flutes and the trumpets that enter later on in that song don't feel show-offy. There's a myriad of gimmick metal bands where the main appeal or selling point of the band is the odd instrument that traditionally isn't in metal music being made to fit that genre. These bands are not bad by default or anything like that. Sometimes those experiments with new timbres can pay off and result in some gorgeous music, but whenever I listen to that music, I can only ever hear the wink and the nod that the band is giving the listener. That wink and nod is nowhere in Murmure. The sampling of brass and woodwinds feels natural. It feels like the only way those songs could come out. Instead of these sounds being in our face, the album takes a more mature approach and lets these sounds add to the atmosphere. Most of the album is based around the two soundscapes it elicits: black metal sections against ambient sections. The black metal sections are noisier and feature the instruments and tropes that we are used to, while the ambient sections are almost all synths and samples. These atmospheres are different enough to be drastically noticeable, but the album just seems to move between the two without really addressing their differences. This album never really puts the two styles against one another or has them both dance together. Instead, they're just both periods of the song, both good, mind you, but not necessarily existing in harmony or in discord with one another. This lack of care between the two sections could be seen as an ever-evolving piece that just flows between itself, constantly changing and morphing, but I wouldn't really feel that way because there's never a climax to these songs. There are just two parts that kind of weave together, and eventually the guitar is just left alone with no other instruments supporting it, and I guess that could be the climax of the song, but it doesn't feel like it's building up to something. Instead, it just kind of leaves us there. So I can't really find a climax, and the two parts don't really work well together, or at the very least they're not interacting in a really interesting way. But this is all nitpicky. I don't think the album suffers too much from this. That's probably the biggest flaw with this record, and it does everything else exceptionally well. It explores ambience in a great way, and its approach to black metal is fresh and unlike anything else I've really heard in the genre. I hope Murmure inspires black metal artists to look at their genre in a different way, to explore new ways of expression through that genre, and create some beautiful music. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I just want to say two things real quick. Number one, school is really starting to pick up again, so I may not be able to keep up with weekly uploads. It may drop a couple of weeks. If you don't see a new video, that's why. So, sorry if that happens. I'll try my best not to do that. Thing number two, I reached 100 subscribers. I'm a triple-digit boy now. I know it's still relatively small in the scope of YouTube music reviewers, but seeing that at triple-digit just makes me so happy. So, thank you so much for getting me that far. I hope you join me in this journey to the very end. If you liked what I do and you want to have your name in the credits or hear the behind-the-scenes commentary for these videos, consider supporting me on Patreon, and like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and yeah, I love you so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.